my name is Benedict for Higher Hertz. In this video, we will be looking at Tokyo Dawn Labs Nova, commonly broadly known as TDR Nova. Nova is a parallel dynamic equalizer. I know that because it says it on the front here. Nova's a very interesting equalizer, and to be honest, while I've had it for a while and used it on and off, it's actually taken me a while to really get my head around what it does. And I just worked out one of the reasons why I had an issue with it, which we will discuss later. But I think it's actually very, very good. I've always thought it's good, but now that I've finally made my peace with it, it makes a lot more sense. Now on to more important matters. Yes, a new Metallica t-shirt. This is now my third Metallica t-shirt. It presents me with a conundrum. I have two Metallica records. I've got Justice and Black. But now I've got three Metallica t-shirts, which unfortunately puts me into the arena of, oh, well, you and Metallica's just a fashion statement. It'd be kind of nice if people sent me like Gary Newman t-shirts, Iron Maiden t-shirts, but I just get Metallica t-shirts. It's kind of cool. I like it. It's nice, it's big, it's airy, it's light, which is helpful, seeing it's a high summer here and actually raining outside. Humidity and rain, ugh, hard work. So, back to the job at hand, which is Nova. Many of you will know it. It's a really commonly talked about or presented or recommended thing in the best free lists. It didn't make to my best free list, and I presented a different EQ, which I still stand behind as being very, very good. There are things in the way that it works which are functionally perhaps more useful, or at least they were at the time for me, than Nova, but I'm getting my head around Nova a lot more now. So I've always been positive about it, but a bit more so now. Who are Tokyo Dawn Labs? Well, they actually do music, but at some stage they, along with somebody else who I don't fully know what he is, but he's the fellow behind some of the code that turned into their things, and the fellow behind the original Molot code, which they have now released as Molotok. And I did put that in my 10 best because I use a version of Molot non-stop. Just about every bus EQ is Molot, essentially. So that's a pretty cool thing. You do need to get your head around it, its character, and possibly even more so in this incarnation and the one in which I use, but it's a cool thing. In this case, we're looking at Nova. As you will see, their product range has actually grown quite a bit, and it's good, but it's stayed focused on the things they're good at. They tend to have two versions. There's a free version, which is what we'll mostly look at here, but there is also what's called a GE, or a Gentleman's Edition version. Now, this is very, very nice, subtle marketing. As in, yeah, you can have this for free, but if you're a real gentleman, you're going to pay for this. I love that. There's no pushy. You get a really useful device, but if you're a true gentleman, then you're going to pony up what's really very fair money for the product itself and the extras that they give you. We will discuss some of the Gentleman's Edition extras a little bit later once we've gone over the basics, because it's inevitable that you will cover that. So the version we're looking at is the free one. We will also have a little bit of a discussion about what you get by being a gentleman. I believe it's always good to be a gentleman because no harm comes from it. So we have an EQ. Initially, it's pretty well straight. Oh, yep, that's just like every other EQ. It's going to have shelves or bells. You can turn the points on and off. You can drag them around, and then you can focus and look at the various doohickeries. You can double-click most things, and they will go back from whence they came, which is all great. Its vision is really good. We'll play some audio. We're going to work with this piece, and I'm actually going to show you through making EQ mixing of this as time goes by. You have the option for this spectrum view. You can just turn it off completely and be an ears only. There are some real advantages in learning to be an ears-only EQer, person who EQs things, but there are also some advantages in EQing with a spectrum. I tend to EQ more with a spectrum now, but I was trained as ears only. I always caution people who start out and end up EQing as eyes only. In other words, they're looking at the spectrum and go, oh, well, I heard someone say that, a vocal should always be dipped at 2K. So they find their 2K with their eyes and they go, well, that must be right. Okay, let's look at the logic of this. When you first got interested in music, was it because you liked Kiss's outfits? Or Duran Duran's puffy sleeves? Or was it because you actually liked the music? Yes, that's the real answer. And it should be the real answer. If that's not your real answer, if your real answer was like, oh, well, I saw it as a way of getting out of the hood, man, or of being as sexy as Cardi G, Anne, okay, but music's probably not really your thing. Have fun with it, but it's probably not going to be your thing until you transition. Music is an ears thing. It's ears to brain. So if you're using and starting with a spectrum view, consider turning it off until you can actually hear what these things are like. So then when you start working, you're going to be like, oh, okay, I know that it's somewhere around 1K. You're just going to start to know this stuff. But you can turn your display on and off. That's why you'd want to do it. It defaults to always being off, which obviously, as I'm saying, has some real sense. I wouldn't mind if it defaulted to being on, but I can see why. If I had a feature request, that would be one of them, that you can set a few features, which we'll discuss here, as being either on or off by default for me. So we can view the signal as it's coming in, meaning that if I do this serious bit of EQing, we don't see the change, or we can monitor the out. So you see how that's changing. Based on what we've done. So it's showing us the results of what we've done. And that's the mode I tend to use, but which you use is entirely up to you. There's the ability to see a sidechain signal as well. Sidechain can be something that's coming from outside. Actually, I haven't looked at whether this does pull in sidechain from somewhere outside. It might well do. But sidechain means that you are seeing the signal that is going to drive compressors and the like, which is what we'll get into later. Or you just have it off. So personally, I go with the out spectrum view, because that way I can see my changes as well. Because if you're going to see them, you might as well see them. We have 4 bands, 1, 2, 3, 4. Each of them is able to be set to a low shelf, a bell, or a high shelf. I'm more of a bell kind of a guy than a shelf guy, but there are times where shelves are useful. Please don't default to them by just going, oh, well, I need more bass, and I need more bass to be manly and do this kind of stuff. It does not work well. There are times where, especially if I've got a limited number of bands and I've kind of run out of bands, and I wanted a bell, but I've only got a shelf left where I might pull in my high pass to create another kind of bell. So there are options there as to how you manage these things. We can obviously set the frequency center or point at which it works. That's that one there. And the width. So the broader the width, let's have some music. The broader the width, the more transparent that will seem to be, but the more you're affecting on either side of your center. The more pointy, the narrower your cue, so in other words, the higher the number, the more you're just narrowing down to a particular frequency. And you can hear here I've started to get a resonance here on that particular frequency. So if I were looking for going, I'm hearing that here and I don't like it, then I might well boost this as high as I can and go, that's the thing I'm hearing that I don't like, and then notch it out. So the range there is pretty good. Some EQs will tell you what that is in terms of octaves. This is the type that doesn't. I see no particular right or wrong in this. You just, after a while, get used to the numbers tend to equate to this. They mean something, but so be it. You will then find that you've got this threshold thing. It's grayed out to start with. But if you press threshold, you've now got access to these extra knobs. So what this has now become is a kind of compressor. It is not a multi-band compressor, or at least it shouldn't be. It should still be a perfectly normal EQ, but behind it, what we can't see is that there is a band splitter that will split to, obviously, up to 4 bands, and the width of those bands will be defined by our Q and our frequency center. We can then, just like a normal compressor, set a threshold, so above this, or below this, but above this, we will start to do the turn the level down. So as you see here, it's responding to the material. So the compressor is taking its signal, which is called a side chain, which in this case is the signal that we're listening to, but if this has a side chain input on the side, then we could be flying in something else. Like we could be flying in a vocal. If we're struggling to get our vocal to sit nicely in our mix, and we don't really want to EQ to just put that slice in there because otherwise it sounds dull, then we could consider a dynamic EQ. So we could fly in our vocal, particularly the bit where we want it to cut through, and say, okay, that's the point where I want you to cut through. Let's just turn off our other bands for the moment. That's the point where I want you to cut through, and there's our threshold and what have you. And this instrument would just have that pulled out of the way. You can do that as wideband, just with normal, or you can do that as dynamic if you want to focus it. And you can leave that really broad, or narrow it right down. Now, if we are in a situation where, as I said before, let's say we found our frequency, and let's say we don't like that, then we could set a threshold here and say that it really only gets pulled back once it starts to get loud. Because one of the problems with saying, oh, okay, we'll do this, hear how it starts to thin out? Yeah, we're getting rid of the problem, but we're creating another problem. Whereas if we do this, we've kind of got the best of both worlds. We're still keeping our cake, all those frequencies, when they're not too loud. But when they get louder is normally when we start to really perceive them as a problem. You know, like a crying baby it's okay, you can tolerate that to a certain point. But once it gets really loud, really long time, then you start to get like... So this is a way of saying, okay, we'll leave what's natural and normal, because babies cry. But the point where it becomes just a bit much, then we start to say, we'll push you back. And that's actually turns out to be a really nice way of doing things, because it's actually more natural and it's constantly moving. You'll see that as we go through the mixes, and none of that's prepared. I just set up the material that you're hearing, but none of what I'm going to do is prepared. But there will probably be points where we decide, okay, if we have this constantly moving, we're going to get a more exciting result, because we are designed as hunters to look for movement. Movement is like, there might be a rabbit there. Once we think there's a rabbit there, our body pumps adrenaline into us, and we're ready to go, and that's exciting. Oh, rabbits! So your threshold is really, really cool because it allows you to set how aggressive we want this whole thing to be. And your ratio is how hard it's going to act once it's been triggered. So if we were bringing in a sidechain like our vocalist, and we really want to keep those two very, very close together, yet give the impression of distance, then we can keep our threshold relatively high and our ratio pretty high. So it goes from not really doing anything to whoa, which is different from being deep. You might think, oh, but it looks the same, but it's going to feel a little different. As to which is correct, well, you've got to work that out based on your mix. There is no formula. I will hammer this home every video. There is no formula. If you think there is a formula you can use over and over again, you are not designed to be a mix engineer. Music is not about formulas. There are certain formulas, and there's great value in knowing them. But if you apply them just like Lego blocks, it will be unimaginative music. It will not be exciting. There won't be like, ooh, rabbits. So the threshold and the compression thing is what makes it a dynamic equalizer. So it's an EQ that has the functionalities of a compressor behind it to waggle the knobs for you. And it's a very, very nice thing to have. We've also got our low pass and high pass. So we can set these, and there is a thing that causes it to do that, and I can not always remember where it is. Sometimes that happens. I don't understand. There we go. It's not happening now. Okay, obviously if it's selected, then it'll move everything. That's just a feature. Remember, I tend not to read the manuals, especially not for doing this, because if a thing is not self-evident or able to be explained, there's something wrong with the design. So I work that out fairly quickly. So we've got high pass. We can set various slopes between 6 dB through to 72 dB, which is thou shalt not pass. Cool. Now here's actually a trick. I'm not a big fan of talking about tips and tricks, but this one is a useful one. Let's get that one out of the way. If you do not have much of a somewhere else to check your mixes situation, then you can use an EQ like this one, especially with fairly aggressive slopes, to give yourself a sense of, well, what might it sound like if it were on a something or other else. Mobile phone. Does my mix work on a mobile phone? Well, sounds like it probably will. So you've got ways to set things up. And this is a really nice way of checking, is my mix going to translate? Far more than running around in cars and getting your mate to come over so you can listen on his Kenwood sub in his Silencer Little. This is far more practical, especially if you go hardcore and put it into mono out of only one speaker, so single point source. And then do this. So you're hearing mono out of one speaker, not mono out of two speakers, because that's not mono. And do this. Does my mix translate? Not does my mix sound as good, because no, it doesn't. It sounds horrid. But if the person is used to listening on their phone speaker or 2-inch speaker out of their little tranny, then this is a close enough approximation of what they're going to get. You might add some kind of distortion or something, but it's not about being clever. It's just being, does it work? If you are one of those people who insists that their whole mix happens between 20 and 50 hertz, you're suddenly going to realize that your mixing is broken. Because here, there's nothing there. And you might go, oh, but it's my style of music, it needs it. If you want your music to play anywhere passably, then you will work out how to have things that are happening here represented well enough up here that they're still going to work. What's his name? Return of the Mac. If I put it through there, it's still going to sound like a cool song. So your high pass and low pass filters are useful not just for getting things right in your EQ, but also for how to use them elsewhere. I wasn't going to do that, but it's a thing that came up recently, and it's a really cool thing to learn. Now, a feature that this device has, and many people will say is a great thing, but kind of annoys me, and something that did put me off, is this, that it's gain compensated, which means that as we do things like this, which is adding a lot of level, the output level is staying essentially the same. So the system is saying, oh, okay, you've added 12 dB of overall level here, let us pull that back for you. So if we A-B compare, they are essentially the same level, different tone, but roughly the same level. Now, in theory, that is great, because A-Bing with different levels can, for the unwary, give you the idea that the louder one is always better. Add 78 dB right up here where it's screaming at you like a banshee, and you might still go, yeah, that's better. But you'll notice at the same time, it can make our EQing mojo seem weak. You know, like poor kung fu, that our EQ can feel like it's not doing much of anything. And that one really has frustrated me with the device. However, if we turn it off, different people are going to have different opinions on this. But if you start using this device and feel like, man, it's got whack kung fu, this thing, it's no good, turn your EQ auto gain off. Because then you will be able to hear that it is doing work all the way through, and it'll possibly also remind you that when you've got it screaming like a banshee like that you might not have been doing the right thing in the first place. So up to you, but if it were me and there were an option in the setups, which we'll go through in a moment, I'd actually have that set to off. Up to you. We can bypass that device here. We can also hear Delta now. Sometimes I get that working, sometimes I don't. But it's the difference. Maybe it only works on the EQ. Yes, okay, it obviously only works with the EQ. See, so sorted the thing out. Fine design there. Within this, we've also got what's called wideband. So we can compress a single band. As we saw here, we can take our single band. Let's say we wanted this to be brighter overall, but we also don't want it to become problematic. So you can see that as there is not much signal, we get all that extra brightness that we were apparently looking for, and as there's signal, it ducks it back out of the way. But there's also a wideband mode, which is kind of like a normal compressor, but there's a bit more to it, and I will encourage people to read the manual. I do think this can be a little tricky to understand. Is it that they've implemented it poorly? Probably not, because it's not a thing I have much experience with. 30 years and dynamic EQs with wide bands and other alternates is a pretty new sort of a thing. It has some interesting features in that you can move all your bands like this. Quite why it is, I'm not sure. Again, I'm going to strongly recommend that you read your manual. I'm not being lazy. If I get to a point where I need to do it, and I think I did read the manual on it some time ago, then it will embed and make more sense. But it is a mode, it is deliberate. Your wideband means that if we turn off, where have we got our, that's number 2. Let's start simply by clicking outside of anything, as in none of these are selected. We can be in wideband mode. Let's just turn that off altogether. So wideband mode, that's just a compressor. It's easy to see. Oh, okay. And it behaves just like a normal compressor. We're getting it into messing up our signal there by trying to move too fast. All the usual things. So you can see it move with a level. So you can combine certain bands to be part of the wideband or certain bands to be not part of the wideband. So here, it moves the whole spectrum as we set it. Once we put it into threshold, see how it's moving independently. So we can end up with very complex moving curves. This is why I say you need to take your time with it and probably read the manual and keep playing with it till you go, I can't give you the aha moment. But you can give that to yourself. We can also switch this band into the wideband setting as well. So it copies the wideband settings across to this particular channel, this particular EQ point. Again, take your time understanding that. We've got ability to mix wet and dry. Never fully get that on EQs, but we can do it. And we can also manually adjust our input-output gain as well. That is basically the device. Oh, I did promise looking at the settings. They're worth looking at. We can have some control over how it behaves. I like that we can resize. Oh my God, it's so tiny. Change frame rates and what have you. Keep that relatively low. While attempting to have a very high frame rate, you're going to tax your computer unnecessarily. This I do like, that you can set it to just naturally render at the highest quality that it'll run at, which is kind of cool. That way you don't have to fuss about with, what am I going to set with oversampling and this, that, and the other, because I'm not a fan of oversampling. I get it, and it can be great, but don't make me mess with it. This whole idea is like, yep, we're going to get on and it's going to work, and then we're going to let it render off at the highest quality possible. Me likes that. As I said before, I wouldn't mind another little screen that lets me set certain preferences, like setting what my spectrum mode is going to do, setting whether EQ gain is in or out. I wouldn't mind one of those. So if TD people are watching, please, that would add a lot of value to your product. Not just for me, but I'm sure for quite a few other people. There can be some basic preferences as to how things are for when they turn this fella on. You can also work in various mono, some difference, left, right, what have you mode. There you go, internal, external, and side chains and what have you. So they are there. There's a good amount of care and thought. You've got A, B modes and moving A to B and all that kind of stuff. We should look at the Gentleman's Edition. So if you are gentleman enough to pay for the tools that you use, and if you want someone to pay for your song, same. So if this becomes a regular thing for you, consider the investment because they've invested in you, but more because they give you more product. So what do you get? You get a couple more bands, and you might be like, well, why don't I get 20 trillion or an infinite number of bands? Well, yeah, it becomes unmanageable. You create some potential problems with that. 4 bands is okay, but there are going to be a few times where you start to be a bit like, and it's also going to depend on how you EQ. Me, I EQ in 2 points as a general rule of thumb. I have my mix EQ, which is what you're going to see me doing here. Normally I do that within Reason's built-in EQ because it's got a nice window with a spectrum. I press F2 and I've got all that. Want to see that, go watch the Reason 12 video. I should walk you through that. So this is going to feel a little funny having to open an EQ every single time, but that's how it is for most DAWs. That's what's called a mix EQ. So you're not doing heavy surgical work at that point. You're just finessing the sound to make it fit in the mix. And then you've got the surgical. So if I were using Nova as my the one EQ, I might well have 2 instances per track. Not every track, because I don't get into surgical unless I feel I need to get surgical. That might come when I'm building a sound, going, don't want that bit of the sound, in which case that's surgical. I'm not going to reach for my mix EQ and lumber it with a surgical brutalization. If I'm working in a mix EQ situation, as in just sort of going, yeah, a little bit more of this, a little bit more of that, no, that's a problem, then I may well actually then insert an EQ. So that's where I would have my general mix Nova, close it, go to the track, insert a Nova, get as much as I need to be, but never more. Do not get aggressive with EQs unnecessarily thinking you're improving things. You're probably weirdifying them. And if that's what your mix, you want to be all full of kinds of sounds, and that's like, here's my Goober Nation, brilliant, go for it. But if you're trying to have things feel organic and natural, don't over EQ. It's a great way to make things go. And that's uncomfortable. Even if you think I've improved it, you just uncomfortableized it for the listener who's like, why does it sound like that? Like your 10-year-old might think that his Goober sculptures are super cool, but you look at them and you just go, that's disgusting. Don't do that to your own music. God knows, if you're trying to sell yourself as a mix engineer, absolutely don't do it to your client's music, unless that is the order of the day. So 4, you will run into some issues, but if you're regularly running into issues there, you might just be trying to do 2 jobs in one space. But your gentleman gives you 2 more, which is very nice, especially for surgical work. If you're getting into needing 6 for mix work, then I question what's going on. But if you are getting into surgical work, more is often nicer, so that you can really finesse. You can put a couple of bands together, like let's just turn that off for a moment. You can put one band here and one band there to finesse how your bands work overall. That's surgical. You generally won't be doing that at a mix level. So 2 more is actually a really pretty big jump. Remember, the software has to manage these, so infinite is rather silly. You also get some more features in the dynamics section. It will do more stuff. I will have you go read those because you need to understand what they are and whether they're relevant for you or not. You can download and try that version as well. They're very, very open about that. You also get AI stuff. They call it Smart Ops. And there's pictures of it and you can try it and what have you. And as these things go, I guess it's good. But for anyone who knows me, they know I am not a fan of that kind of stuff. I think it does more damage than good. I did download their Slick EQ, put Alan Parsons' Eye in the Sky on, recorded it in, had it apply that to one of my tracks that I was mixing, and it was like, well, that's kind of interesting. Did it make my track seem better? No, which is a shame. It did not turn my track into Alan Parsons' Eye in the Sky. And nor should it, because my track should sound like my track. So be very, very cautious with this AI obsession. So we'll run through the good and bad, and then part 2 of this, you'll actually watch me walk through a mix, making a mix using Nova and a few other goodies. So what's good? What's good is that there is real quality design and sound. All the TDR stuff, the Tokyo Dawn stuff, has a great attention to detail in its design and its sound. It may not have as 11 trillion features as some other seeming competitors, but what is there is very, very well thought through. You might need to get on the TDR train to fully understand it, but it is well done, and that's real magic when you're looking to learn to marry a tool, as I talked about with the Valhalla delay. You know, you marry your delay unit; it's yours for life. You know, you've got to get to know each other and work with each other like this. And EQ is a tool a lot like that. The finesse and the quality, the care in the design, it's worth more than 28 extra bands. So design and sound, absolutely great. Its features are very good, especially if you're looking at the free version. For what you get for free is such a classy piece of equipment. Features are well thought through, and pricing on either side, whether it's the free version or the Gentleman's Edition, pricing's very, very good. €60 does add up. Euro to AUD translation, or euro to anybody's translation, is not always even, but it's still very fair for what you are getting. Honestly, I struggled a little bit with, well, what do I put as the bad, but I will raise the issues that I've already raised. They are not killers and not really bad, but to do my job right, I feel like I should always put both sides of the equation. I don't like the auto level match. I've already said that. I'd rather it be defaulted to off. I understand all the logic as to why it, but I don't like it. So I'd rather that I didn't have to turn it off every time, or remember to turn it off every time. That it's there is great. That I'm forced to use it rather than choosing to option in, not so great. But it's a small thing. The wideband, yes, it is a little tricky to understand, but compression overall is always a little tricky to understand. And then when you add a couple of extra layers of things, especially things that you can't really see, getting your head around that is a little tricky, but again, don't necessarily think that they've made a bad call in how to implement it. I think it's very nicely done, and I think I did have my head around it, but then didn't use it for so long it kind of, left the building. And again, this is not against Tokyo Dawn. I know it's the fashion of the day, but this AI stuff, really, don't go there. It's not as useful as you think. It stops you from learning your craft. Learning your craft comes by doing, not by thinking that you can sort of souvenir somebody else's skills, because it doesn't work that way. If you want to souvenir someone else's skills, find a mentor, pay them. I notice that when I mentor people, clients, what have you, and when they sit with me, or sometimes over electronic things, but it's often they tend to be a little less likely to fully engage, which is a shame. But particularly those that sit with me, they're invested in the process, and the smart ones, I see it come back, a week or a month later. It's like, you've really taken on board, you've soaked up what I'm talking about, the whys, not the, oh, I just blindly turn this knob to here and I will be bitchin' pro dude. They've really understood why, and they've applied that thinking, and it's like, that's good creative decision. That's what you want to soak in, not just trying to steal somebody else's profile. All right, good and bad, really all goods. There's bads only because I feel morally obliged to do it. Okay, so part 2 of the video, actually going to walk you through making a mix, doing the EQ moves that I feel necessary, and possibly dynamic stuff, using just the Nova and a few other things. So we've got our piece, which has an intro. A verse. Pre-chorus, and chorus. Now it's set to loop between verse, pre-chorus, chorus, round and round and round. As it loops, you may hear some notes get dropped because there is a groove in here, which means that sometimes they'll be before that point. We're going to listen to this quite a lot, so get used to that. If that's a thing that bothers you, you may not be cut out to be a mix engineer. In terms of what's happening up here, there is one send to a reverb. We can pop those out of the way for now and have a look in here. Housekeeping. The reverb that we're sending to is a Tal reverb, which I reviewed a while ago now. In the masters at the moment, there is a TDR Kotelnikov. Normally I would not be mixing into a compressor, but seeing this is live, it's better to keep things reasonably under control, but there is of course a you shall not pass there as well. Slick EQ is not in, we will use him later. As for the sounds, they're all from things that I have reviewed. Recently, we did SSDD, and they are providing the drums. And the drumming. They were rhythms from in here. That was probably the pre-chorus. So that's where the drums come from. They are pushing through another tal reverb, which just helps embiggen them, and then that gets pushed into the main bus reverb and then goes through a nova. And there's no action on any of the EQs at the moment. In terms of all the other sounds, they are all from Sonic Cat's Purity. They were kind enough to NFR me a copy after, note that, after the review that I did. They were delighted with the time and attention and were kind enough to send me an NFR, so thank you very much. Cool Sonic Cats, Sonic Cool Cats. I have actually used it a few times in things, and this is the perfect use for it of creating a mock-up of a piece. They go, drum and bass go into a bus, which has a compressor. That's one of the Kilohertz devices. Very nice. So that's slow. That's just to help create the groove between drum and bass. I've talked about that a lot more in another video on compression. Definitely the one on the ADHD compressor. I talk about that creating groove in a bus, and then we will EQ the bus. Over on this side, pad. It's probably going to be a little slow to come in. There we go. That's an interesting pad, but it's got this nice movement in it, so that's rather cool. Guitar mutes. They're going through a tal delay, and of course scream for the guitariness. Just adds a bit more to it. An acoustic. These last couple of sounds go through the echo, which is a Reason device. I just grab it because I know it so well. And a lead. I seem to recall this was a few layers. Yes, I finessed this one myself to get the result I wanted. That's what we've got. So I've got just my drums. I don't normally mix in solo, but this is easy for you. We're hearing the reverb both of what's just on the drums and then being pushed into the whole room. Those decisions are already made, and I see no reason to change them. So we might be going, well, okay, what do we want to pull out of these drums? The basic rule of thumb is not bass. We're looking for punch, snap, and sizzle. And punch, snap, and sizzle are in the middle. They are not on the extremes. We're not looking for sub-bass here. Let sub-bass look after itself. You managing sub-bass directly is probably a fail. If you manage the punch right, the sub-bass should follow. Matter of fact, you can even reduce the amount of sub-bass and have the impression that you have a better, tighter, more controlled bass, bassier overall. So there's a nice little bit of something in there. Yeah, I can see something's got a threshold on. I'm going to push that because even though it's a funny thing, it gives us a bit more character, because this is all the character that's been pulled out by El Slato. So let's give it a little bit of character. But we might counter move here. We might even use this way. I like that. That's moving. That's constantly moving. So I'm happy with that. We've got a nice punch, and we've got a nice snap happening here before we've even got to the snappy side of town. Let's consider doing this upside down. Nice. Now, this one may confuse you, but I'm actually going to pull back some of those high highs a little. Because one of the easiest ways to tell everybody in the world that you are using MIDI drums, MIDI orchestras, what have you, is too much treble. No, it's a thing you want to be real cautious of. We might even consider looking at making this dynamic. I kind of like that. Again, it's moving. We've got punch, snap, and sizzle, but we haven't got fizzle, which we don't want. So I'm going to say, yeah, that's probably pretty good. Let's see how it's working with just the bass. Quite nice. Quite nice indeed. So let's fold up what's done. Bass. Okay, we can see we've got some wasted energy here. And that's my fundamental there. It's the one that I dropped to. Well, let's go here and choose a pointy point. And that's given it more body. Notice that those moves are relatively subtle. Very easy to get heavy-handed and go, well, I need to have a massive change here. If you needed a massive change, why'd you choose that sound in the first place? Okay, I get it. If that's the bass player that you're stuck with, and that's the cabinet that he's stuck with, then you might do something. But big moves often end up coming across sounding really cack. So don't make them. Make small moves that just adds that little bit more to it. Now this has actually moved our high pass position. Again, quite why that happens, I'm not sure, but there is nothing wrong with going quite high. Even if you've got a sub, you'll probably hear little to no difference with that because we're actually grabbing the listener's attention here. We can wonder whether we want to get, and we might consider that. So that just as he goes into the high region, then it's just putting a little goose on it, but only when it's needed. But more importantly, we need to be working these two sounds together. Remember, I wouldn't normally do this so much in solo. Okay, they seem to work together. So we'll for the moment say that's done. I might well come back several passes on this in real world, but I don't want to waste too much of your time. Now this is the bus, which means that this is now listening to what you're hearing. Drums and bass as one thing. I'm going to go into wideband mode here and set a little bit of compression. Actually, I've already got that compressor running, but bugger it, let's turn him off, because we can do it from here. Cool. Hear how that's got a little bit more kind of punch and grooviness to it. How you get that depends on your piece. There is no single thing, but use your attack and release numbers until you get that, oh, I like the way that grooves. Obviously depends on the material as to how it grooves, but find that point. Note I didn't do a lot of bass boosting in my drum or bass. I'm pulling them here, because what this does is by boosting the pair of them together, it pulls them so they work together. That's the whole idea of bussing here. Let's make them work together. It's possible things can be a bit too thick. And I know we thickened that up, but we can also again force them to work together just a little bit. Yeah, that gives that little tiny move. Seeing I've got it there already on the snare and it's here. When you get that combination, particularly of the bass and the snare, it's like, that's great. That's now going to jump really, really nicely. So we can actually say, sorry, Kilohertz, Nova did the job for us. Wonderful. Let's move across to our, well, we're not really needing that, so I'll let that go, to our pad. Focus ourselves with this. In. We have got energy down here. We just don't want that in the game. Out. I can see what I've done. That's good. Don't go too high. If we go too high, that could be a wonderful decision if we really want to clarify. Let's see what happens. Now there's some merit in that, so what I might do is go with a much softer slope. Okay, that's nice. Is there something I want to pull through? Well, I'm not really going to know until I've tried. Okay, that's nice. I'm happy with that. It's excessive, but it helps me find the bit that I want to hear more of. I only need to hear a little bit more of it. I had two possibilities, and depending upon what we want to do with the mix, as to what there was something here I liked. It had got this sort of more of an ooh sound, or a little higher with the R sound. But I'm also going to roll off a little here because we need to make space, allow for our more lead instruments. If we just fill the world with this, we're going to have some serious issues. Missed it. Keep missing it, trying to get where the sound plays. Okay, I like that better. So I'm, in some instances, having it rise, in other instances, having it push down. So when it's lower notes and that frequency isn't as dominant, it actually pulls it up, which helps pull those lower sounds through. When it goes high and it can get a little sharp, which I felt maybe was happening, then I thought, well, okay, we've already got our fundamentals up here because we're using higher notes. Let's move it. So it moves all the time, and that keeps attention on it, which is what we really want. We're not saying, I need more treble. We're simply saying, I want more attention on that treble. Completely different mindset, even though the results seem to be the same. So we'll call the pad done. We go to our guitar mutes. Here we go. A lot of flub on the bottom of these. Let's just get rid of that, but not too much. If we get rid of too much of it, suddenly our guitar sounds thin and unmetallic-y. We don't want that. But at the same time, we probably don't want to go boosting our... Sometimes it's good, but chances are it's going to cause more problems than good. That's nice. We want it to feel really transparent, like the EQ's not there, and possibly to pull out some of this. Unless that's the exact sound that you want, if you want that particular sound out of the guitar, that can be really wonderful. I think the Police used that sort of sound, that frequency range quite a lot. Andy's Telly, I think. We'll roll off a certain amount of the treble here because it's not nice. And that's normal. So it sits there subtly. This is not a Metallica record. This is, I don't know, corporate pop or something or other. But we'll call that working nicely. Our acoustic guitar. Now, these acoustic guitars, especially strummed acoustic guitars, are very complex. This is not strummed, but they're a surprisingly complex instrument. Not quite as complex as a violin, but they are quite a complex instrument to work. They often tend to be very full, and it's a mistake that guitarists often make to make them seem more and more full in the body, especially buskers. You go see a busker and he's got like this massive boost somewhere around here so that he can feel like he's Black Sabbath playing alongside Megadeth at the same time as Metallica and Slayer with his one acoustic guitar, and it's just but he's not hearing it that way because he's thinking of how he's creating this massive sound. Don't do it. Pull that as clear of the mix as you can. That mud is no good. Acoustic guitars, we're looking for clarity when they play. There's a little bit of flub down there. We'll just move that out of the mix. Oh, and if any of you sort of going, oh, but you shouldn't do that because you change your phase relationship. Go do what you want to do, but don't get up in other people's faces about something that is always an issue, has always been an issue, will always be an issue. But when you're listening, you should be hearing how it sounds. And if by rolling off here, I'm creating a little bit of a lump here, and I'm not hearing it, then I'm not fit to be a mix engineer. It's simple as that. To say that our tools should have no side effects is unrealistic. The idea of saying, oh, we'll reinvent all our tools so they never have side effects. Okay, great. I'm sure I use some tools that have reduced side effects, but you see, I'd rather know what my side effects are and account for them, as in turning off the EQ gain. I'd rather know what they are and account for them musically, rather than having the machine take them away, because the way it takes them away creates another side effect. So then I've got a side effect with a side effect of its side effect. Don't want that. Part of being a mix engineer is knowing the side effects and then using them intelligently. Compression, it's side effect. Pumping in compression is a side effect. That whole sort of side chain is all nasty side effect used for effect. So if you feel like this gives you the right result, and it genuinely does, your mix doesn't go when you play it on another system, then this is the right definition. Use your ears. Let's have a go at pulling it. No, gets thin. Okay, cool. Acoustics played like that can tend to sound like pianos. I'm not saying it's the greatest. This is a pro forma of a piece, scratch pad sounds. If I were to hand this across to a working partner, let's say Jake, he'd go, okay, I hear what you're doing. He's then going to go, how close do you want this? Or the more we know each other, the more likely he is to just go, yeah, I can hear what your piece wants. Not what you want, what your piece wants. And it'll come back and I'll go, that's great. So work with what you've got in the meantime. And then finally we have our lead sound. So we can close him up. We've got our lead, which is several sounds all at once. So I'm trying to pull various things out, or bring them forward, more to the point. Let's get rid of that. Come on, play me some music. So straight away we know we've got some potential for issue here. It's one of those things you might want to raise and then suddenly you don't want it raised. So let's look at pulling that back a little bit. Oh, much nicer. Okay, so there's that. I like the ting, ting, ting. You know why? Because I put it in there. But we've immediately been able to minimize the kind of annoying chalkboardy sound that we've got in the middle there. And that's making the sound a lot easier. On the feel, do we want to put anything in the bottom end of it? Provides a talk, which is interesting. And it does pull forward the ting on the top. Ding dong, ding dong. Let's have a see how it sits inside the mix. From working in solo, I've walked myself into a little bit of a problem, a little bit of a dead end. Now notice that I'm prepared to recognize that. I'm glad that this has happened because you get to see what happens when you work in solo. I'm glad I've recognized that by going, yes, I've brought out the ting and the tok sound, so I've pulled the bell aspect of that sound forward, but I lost the flute aspect of it. The bell doesn't really carry a melody, even though it does, but it's not carrying the melody as anywhere near as well as the fluty aspects of it is. But I'd managed to minimize them. In solo, it was fine because it wasn't anything to compete with them. But once it's back in the mix, oh yes, it's just kind of got wrecked. So let's consider a pair of things. I'm actually going to end up with these kind of outside of each other, and this is where extra points would be nice. Hang on, no, it doesn't undo very well. That's an annoyance. Please fix that. Okay, here straight away, I'm solving the screechy with this one, which is dynamicing, and pulling this forward with the, yes, it's a funny looking compression or EQ curve. But in A to B, I'm happy that it's doing the job because it sounds good in the mix. I might feel a little differently at these things, but in here it's working. And I have found that I can do passable mix work inside these things. I wouldn't want to do it for paid work, but I've noticed when I come out of these things, oh yeah, that's not too bad. We will have a look at our masters now. This is finalizing. So let's look at what we're getting. This is a Tokyo Dawn product. Again, the Kotelnikov is free. There's a gentleman's edition with more stuff. This is an interesting device. It requires a more subtle understanding of compression because it's running two types of compressors at once. There's one compressor, but it's running two types of math, and then you're combining them, which is what your peak versus crest knob is about. So you've got one which is a fast peak compressor, the other is a slower RMS compressor. So peak is like the really fast movements, RMS is the averages. And there's swings and roundabouts. There's benefits on each approach. This combines, allows you to almost like parallel mix, sort of. It's just saying, we've got this kind, the maths for this approach, we've got the maths for this approach, we'll put them together so your compressor will move somewhere in between the two. Got to have a feel for compression, but it does a very nice job. If you don't have much of a feel for compression, you can still use it and get very nice results. Just possibly don't mess with the settings you don't really understand. Warping them around or using random presets is not the way to go. Keep with your default and then go very softly, and you're going to get a better result. I'm still happy with that. We've changed nothing in particular. Let's look at what we will call a mastering EQ. Now, I could well do this with Nova, and I do this with Nova, but I'm showing you another one, the Tokyo Dawn's, the Slick EQ. I don't love this myself for a track EQ. Now, nothing wrong with it. It is a personal choice. What I do very much like is its saturation. It's got various different saturation flavors, and they do work very nicely. They feel and sound nice. There are also different flavors for consoles. Try them, see what works nicely for your track. Don't get set with the idea being there's only one sound. I quite like the American, and sometimes the Soviet sounds awful. Sometimes it's just like, that's the solution. But it can saturate on the EQ band, but that only happens when you have something happening. All we're looking for here at the Masters is to have an overall sense of what works nicely. Now again, note, I've gone to a bell. I am not going to a... I could, but I'd rather control it here. We can go to the high pass. It's just, there's nothing there anyway. So let's pull up this. There we go. So honestly, there's not a lot in a mix below 35 or 40. It's there, and if somebody has a truly wonderful sub, and I don't mean a loud sub, then yes, it will be there and it'll be felt. Even on my speakers, it will be felt. It's even felt in these things. So don't go too high, but also don't go too low, because then there's a lot of energy that's being used, which takes away from your total overhead, because bass uses a huge amount of energy. But I'm going to put a little bit of a boost in somewhere around there. I can... Oh, again, it's got auto gain. I don't want that. You can hear it's very thick. I don't want it to be like that. But people like the feeling of thickness, so we find that little bit of thickness. Now that's up in a punch frequency, which is great, because we're after more punch than anything else. We've got a couple of options as to what we do with our mid, and you'll see I'm working bottom to top, but I'm always trying to think the whole thing at the same time. It's all very well to go, I'm only thinking about my bass. Yeah, that's no good, because people are going to just think about your whole mix. And what do I want to do? Let's look at the idea of cutting something. That's kind of nice, obviously excessive, but by being excessive, we go, does this overall give me a tone that I kind of like? Broken, if we heard that come back from a mix engineer, he'd be like, oh, mate, far too heavy-handed. But there's a clarity there. A bit sort of tubby in the middle. There's a clarity there. So that's what we're looking for. Do I want a bit of that? Obviously, if we... Yuck. So it's another way of looking for things, to find, okay, too much of that. But that can be a very dangerous approach if you do not know what you're looking for. So the scan around with everything at peak is a very dangerous approach, because everything's going to sound nasty. Every single band in here with an extra 18 dB on top of it is going to sound awful. So you're going to be cutting a trillion things. But it's quite common that somewhere around the 460, 480 or whatever, that you might get a kind of a thickness, just sort of just spare tire, rather you didn't have it sort of thickness. So it's leaving the punch that we got with our kick around here about 90. Notice these moves are very small, only a dB or so. If you're looking at more than a dB or so, much more than about 2 dB, your mix needs attention, not your masters. Your masters are not there to make your mix sound good. They're to make the most of a great sounding mix already. You should be able to ship your mix as it is. Whack a clipper on top of it, ship it. It should sound good. If it doesn't, fix your mix. If you can't fix your mix, fix your composition, fix your arrangement, fix your singer. This is really important, otherwise you get it backwards. And now, that's pulled out some of that murk. which would be masking some of our more delicate high frequencies. Easy to grab these first and just go. But hear how brittle and nasty that sounds? Yeah. Not to mention the clipping. So I've left that to last because now I've uncovered some of it by removing some of that murk. So I can now decide where I want to add a little bit of again, very easy to go very heavy-handed. You'll see that I've gone with a bell rather than a boost. With digital, it's very easy to end up with a huge amount of stuff happening right up here. And you don't notice it because it might be down here on the meter, but that's huge. So it's often nicer to roll things back. If I've got a very bright mix, I might go to one of these and actually roll back a bit. So I might have a mix, say 12, and that will clarify the mix. Hear how that's actually warmed the mix and clarified particularly that lead, the fluty thing. Because it's actually moving some of these out of the way, giving us a more realistic, analog kind of a feel. So that's one possible master. The other possible is maybe picking something like about 6. If you feel like you're lacking clarity, that's a nice way to pull things forward. Depends on how your mix has gone. If your mix is nice and bright, then you might well go this other way of 12 or something or other and pull a few dB off. I might actually go with that because I think we've got punch. I think we've got snap. We've got great snap from the drum EQ and dynamics and the rhythm bus EQ dynamics. I think we've got wonderful punch and snap there. Sizzle, I'd rather have that in here than fizz up here. So I think, bearing in mind it's these things, that might be a nice result. Now we've got the saturation extra. This is on the result. Linear, that's nothing. Silky is mild. And you can see a little sort of metery thing there telling you how much action there is. Mellow. Deep. Funky. The silkier one's is actually nicer. It's kind of there. I would then just be looking at my levels. All seems about right. Might push a dB out of that, and we would have our piece. fly around. It is possible, because I haven't really been thinking of story, and nor does this piece particularly have a story, but it's possible that I have mixed it slightly at odds to itself. The top half of it, so sort of pad up through leads, is verging on the new age. The bottom half of it is currently verging on a little bit punchy. But that shows you how you do those things. I may have made that a little too punchy for the top end. But that's because the piece doesn't really have an official story or a direction. If I were going more new age with this, then I probably would be backing off that drum and bass combination to be less punchy, to allow the expansive new agey feel to come off the top. If it were more rock and roll, then I possibly wouldn't have gone so new agey on the top end. Depends, but if it were some of that ghastly corporate type stuff, then exactly where I've got it, so they can go, oh, it's lively, it's exciting, but it's sedate and mellow all at the same time. Like, those things are really a doable thing. You can decide on whether that's right or wrong, but there was no story as such to follow. But if you felt like, oh, geez, that was a bit... Yeah, I'm fully aware of that. It's an exercise just to show you how it works. The Nova is, I think, a really great tool, and once I realized that the lack of powerful kung fu feeling in the EQing was a result of this gain compensation, more than a lack of mojo, then I reapproached it and gone, oh, that's really rather cool. I'm tending, not that I'm a big fan of DSs, but I'm tending to use this more for DSing, because, I didn't go over it, we've got this great pan solo. I can solo a particular band, find out exactly that, oh, yep, that's the thing that might be a bit... and then set that with a threshold and what have you. So it makes a really, really nice de-esser, in which I feel like I'm more in control than the average de-esser plugin. So that's kind of what a lot of what's got me back into using it. And yeah, once I realized that if I get rid of the solution to a problem that I didn't feel like I had in the first place, then I get rid of the problem that I did definitely have. It's a wonderful device. If you're using the free version, you cannot complain about a thing, because it's very, very, very nicely designed and nicely built. If you're going up to the full version, you've probably been using this for a while, and it's probably settled itself into your workflow and your lifestyle, or what have you, as a mix engineer. And I don't think there's any negatives to be said about it. Just that usual caution on the AI thing. I think they've implemented it nicely. Technically, it's great, but it should be you who's making your mix decisions, not somebody else. And if you're trying to scavenge somebody else's mix decisions and apply them to your track, it's not going to work out, because you're no longer telling your story. My piece of music with Alan Parsons' Eye in the Sky, coolest music ever, dude, sort of draped over the top of it like a blanket to hide the dead rats, is not actually making my piece any better. It's not actually really showing a lot of honor to Alan Parsons and Eye in the Sky, and it's sure not honoring my story. So go carefully with the whole lure of the AI thing. The fact that you don't need to use that at all, it doesn't intrude in the slightest. If you get the gentleman's edition, and like me, you're not keen on that, there's just a button up here. If you don't press that button, there's no sense that it's there at all, which is super fabulous. Any questions about this kind of stuff? Ask them on down below, preferably after hitting the subscribify yourself to the Higher Hertz thing, because that lets YouTube know that we are of value and helps push what's happening forward, which helps continue the channel to grow and exist. So from my new Metallica shirt, Higher Hertz, and of course myself, you have a great day.